The emergency transmission crackled through the quantum relay with the desperation of a dying civilization. Captain Zephyr Kane stood rigid on the bridge of the U.S. Defiance, her weathered hands gripping the command console as the alien voice filled the silence between stars. The words came in broken standard, each syllable weighted with terror that transcended species barriers. They come, the Dark Armada, consuming everything, no survivors, warn the galaxy. The transmission cut to static, leaving the bridge crew in stunned silence. Kane's steel-gray eyes remained fixed on the main view screen, where the coordinates of the transmission's origin glowed like a wound against the star chart. The Kepler Nexus, a thriving trade hub that had housed over 12 million beings just 72 hours ago. "Captain," whispered Ensign Kira Thorne from the communications station, her voice barely audible. "Long-range sensors confirm it. The entire Kepler system, it's gone dark. No life signs, no energy signatures. Nothing." Lieutenant Jackson Reeve, the ship's tactical officer, turned from his station with disbelief etched across his angular features. "That's impossible. The Kepler defense grid was the most advanced in 3 sectors. They had a full battle fleet stationed there." Dr. Narita Cross emerged from the science station, her pale hands trembling as she clutched a data pad. The xenobiologist had spent years studying the various species that called the Kepler Nexus home. Now her life's work had been reduced to sensor echoes and fading quantum signatures. "The energy residue patterns are unlike anything in our databases," she reported, her voice hollow. "Whatever did this, it wasn't conventional warfare." Kane finally turned from the view screen, her expression carved from granite. The Defiance was a Prometheus-class heavy cruiser, one of humanity's newest and most advanced vessels, but even she felt small against the implications of what they'd witnessed. "Set course for the Sol system, maximum warp. We need to report this to Fleet Command immediately." As the ship's engines hummed to life, the bridge received another transmission, this one from Admiral Theron Blackwood himself. The Admiral's scarred face appeared on the main screen, his cybernetic eye glowing with barely contained fury. Behind him, the bustling command center of Luna Station buzzed with activity. "Captain Kane, I trust you've received the distress call from Kepler Nexus." Blackwood's gravelly voice filled the bridge. "I'm ordering you to investigate. We need intelligence on whatever's responsible for this." Kane felt her blood chill. "Sir, with respect, our sensors show nothing but empty space where Kepler used to be. Whatever force was capable of annihilating an entire system is exactly why we need boots on the ground," Blackwood interrupted. "Or in this case, humanity's finest ship in the void. The Defiance is the most advanced vessel in our fleet, Captain. If anyone can uncover what happened and survive to tell about it, it's your crew." The transmission ended, leaving Kane alone with the weight of command and the growing certainty that they were sailing toward something beyond human comprehension. She looked around at her bridge crew, young faces filled with determination and fear in equal measure. These were the best humanity had to offer, and she was about to lead them into the unknown. "You heard the Admiral," Kane announced, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "Plot a course for the Kepler Nexus. Dr. Cross, I want every sensor array calibrated for maximum sensitivity. Mr. Reeve, prep all weapons systems and ensure our shields are at full capacity. Ms. Thorne, monitor all frequencies for any additional transmissions." As the Defiance changed course, Kane retreated to her ready room. The weight of 1,300 souls pressed down on her shoulders as she stared out at the swirling maelstrom of hyperspace. Somewhere in the darkness ahead lay the answers they sought, along with whatever force had reduced a thriving star system to cosmic dust. She thought of her daughter back on Earth, safely tucked away in the academies of New Geneva. Sarah would be starting her final year at the Engineering Institute, blissfully unaware that her mother was potentially flying toward humanity's first contact with an extinction-level threat. Kane touched the small photo on her desk, Sarah's graduation from Basic Academy, her smile bright with the promise of following in her mother's footsteps among the stars. The intercom chimed softly. "Captain, we're approaching the edge of the Kepler system," reported Lieutenant Reeve. "Sensors are picking up something." Kane straightened her uniform and returned to the bridge, where the viewscreen now displayed the cosmic graveyard that had once been humanity's gateway to the outer rim. Debris fields stretched across millions of kilometers, but it wasn't the wreckage that made her blood freeze, it was the perfect spherical void at the system's heart, where Kepler Prime had once orbited its star. The star itself flickered weakly, its light somehow diminished, as if something had been feeding on its very essence. "My God," whispered Dr. Cross. "What could do this?" Before anyone could answer, the ship's proximity alarms began to wail. The Defiance drifted through the outer rim of what had been the Kepler system, her sensors sweeping across fields of debris that told a story of systematic annihilation. Captain Kane stood motionless at the center of the bridge, watching the tactical display as it painted a picture of devastation beyond imagination. Fragments of starships, space stations, and even planetary matter hung in the void like cosmic tombstones. "Captain, I'm reading massive gravitational anomalies throughout the system," Dr. Cross reported, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. "The spatial distortions are consistent with controlled black hole technology, but the scale." She paused, checking her readings again. "Sir, they would have needed the energy output of a dozen stars to create this level of destruction." Lieutenant Reeves' tactical station erupted in a cascade of warning lights. Multiple contacts emerging from the debris field. Range 200,000 kilometers and closing. His fingers danced across the controls as targeting solutions appeared on his screen. "Captain, these aren't showing up on conventional sensors. Only quantum detection arrays." The main view screen shifted to show the approaching objects, and the bridge fell silent. They were ships, but unlike anything in the known galaxy's databases. Sleek and organic in appearance, they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating moving wounds in space itself. Each vessel pulsed with veins of sickly purple energy that reminded Kane of infection spreading through healthy tissue. "Incoming transmission," announced Ensign Thorne, her voice cracking. It's not like anything we've encountered before. The signal is interfacing directly with our quantum core, bypassing all communication protocols." The bridge lights dimmed as an alien presence filled the Defiance. When the voice came, it seemed to speak from inside each crew member's mind rather than through the speakers. The words carried with them images of conquest, of entire civilizations reduced to energy and consumed, of the infinite hunger that drove the dark armada across the galaxy. "Another young species ventures into our feeding ground," the voice echoed with the cold indifference of entropy itself. "Your ship's energy signature is interesting. More complex than the others who came before. You will make a satisfying addition to our collective." Kane stepped forward, her hand instinctively moving to the phaser at her side. "This is Captain Zephyr Kane of the United Earth ship Defiance. You are in violation of galactic law. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." The sound that emerged from the darkness might have been laughter, if laughter could drain the warmth from space itself. Law. Consequences. Such finite concepts from such finite beings. We are the Dark Armada, the devourers of light, the ending of all stories. We have consumed the energy of 1,000 civilizations, each believing themselves special, each falling to the same inevitable truth. Dr. Cross leaned over her console, her scientific mind working frantically to understand what they faced. "Captain, their ships are generating some kind of entropy field. They're literally draining energy from the space around them. That's why the star appears dimmed. They're feeding on its nuclear fusion." The alien fleet continued its approach, their dark hulls seeming to bend space around them. As they drew closer, the Defiance's own power systems began to fluctuate. Emergency lighting flickered on as primary systems struggled to maintain functionality. "Shields are destabilizing," reported Reeve, sweat beading on his forehead. "Whatever they're doing, it's affecting our antimatter containment systems. If this continues, we'll lose primary power in less than 10 minutes." Kane's mind raced through options, each one more desperate than the last. The Defiance was a powerful ship, but conventional weapons seemed laughably inadequate against an enemy that could drain the energy from stars. Still, she had not earned command by accepting defeat without a fight. "Mr. Reeve, can we reverse our quantum field polarity? Create a feedback loop in their entropy field?" Maybe, Captain. But the power requirements would drain our reserves. We'd have one shot before they overwhelmed us completely." As if sensing their intentions, the Dark Armada ships suddenly accelerated, their organic forms shifting and writhing like living shadows. The lead vessel, larger than the others and covered in what appeared to be sensor arrays made of crystallized darkness, moved to intercept the Defiance. "Captain," Thorne called out, her voice filled with urgency. "I'm detecting another transmission, but this one's coming from inside the system. Grid coordinates suggest it's from the ruins of Kepler station." The secondary view screen activated, revealing a figure that made Kane's blood run cold. It was Commander Lyrix Voss of the Kepler Defense Force, or what remained of him. The proud Altarian warrior's blue-scaled skin had taken on a sickly translucent quality, and his eyes glowed with the same purple energy that coursed through the Dark Armada ships. "Captain Kane," Voss spoke, his voice carrying harmonics that no living throat should produce. How wonderful to see familiar faces in our new feeding ground. I tried to warn you, you know. That transmission you received was my final act of defiance before I was improved. Lyrics, Kane whispered, remembering the proud commander who had shared drinks with her crew during shore leave just months ago. What have they done to you? They have shown me truth, Voss replied, his corrupted features twisting into something that might have been a smile. The futility of resistance. The beauty of entropy. Soon you and your crew will understand as I do. The Dark Armada does not simply destroy, it converts, it improves, it makes eternal. The transmission cut as the enemy ships closed to weapons range. Kane looked around her bridge, seeing the terror and determination warring in her crew's faces. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that had already claimed one of their allies. But they were human, and humans had never backed down from impossible odds. All hands, this is the captain, she announced over the ship's intercom. We are about to face an enemy unlike any we've encountered before. They have consumed entire civilizations, but they've never faced humanity. Today we show them why that was their mistake. The Defiance shuddered as the first entropy wave struck her shields, sending cascades of sparks across the bridge consoles. Captain Kane gripped her command chair as the lights flickered between normal illumination and the eerie emergency glow that bathed everything in crimson. The Dark Armada ships had formed a perfect sphere around them, their organic hulls pulsing with malevolent energy as they began their feeding process. Shield strength down to 60% and falling, Lieutenant Reeve reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. Captain, at this rate we'll lose primary shielding in less than 5 minutes. Dr. Cross looked up from her science station, her face pale but determined. I've been analyzing their energy signatures. The entropy field they generate isn't just draining our power, it's converting it into something else. The quantum signature suggests they're feeding it to something larger, something not in our immediate vicinity. Kane's strategic mind processed this information with the cold efficiency that had made her one of Starfleet's youngest captains. A mothership? Possibly, or some kind of central intelligence. The energy patterns suggest a hive mind structure. Captain, if we could disrupt their connection to this central source, we might be able to even the odds. The main view screen showed the corrupted form of Commander Voss materializing on the bridge of the nearest Dark Armada vessel. His transformation had progressed further since their last transmission. Crystalline growths now covered half his face, and his movements had taken on an unnaturally fluid quality that suggested his bones had been replaced with something more flexible. Zephyr, he called out, using her first name with a familiarity that made her skin crawl. You always were the stubborn one at the Academy. Do you remember our debates about the nature of entropy? How you argued that chaos could be beautiful. You're about to experience that beauty firsthand. I remember a lot of things, Lyrics, Kane replied, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her chest. I remember how you used to talk about protecting the innocent. About standing guard against the darkness between stars. What happened to that man? Voss tilted his head with an inhuman gesture, the crystals on his face catching the purple light of his transformed ship. He evolved. Just as you will. The Dark Armada has shown me the futility of our old ways. We spent our lives fighting entropy, never realizing we could become one with it instead. Ensign Thorne suddenly straightened at her station, her eyes wide with discovery. Captain, I'm picking up quantum resonance patterns in the enemy transmissions. They're not just communicating, they're synchronizing their consciousness across multiple dimensions. Kane felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. Throughout her career, she had learned to recognize the moments when seemingly desperate situations revealed unexpected opportunities. Can we jam their signals? Not jam, but... Thorne's fingers flew across her console. I might be able to introduce a feedback loop into their quantum network. It would require routing our entire communication array through the main deflector, essentially turning the Defiance into a massive signal amplifier. Do it, Kane ordered without hesitation. Mr. Reeve, the moment their coordination breaks down, I want every weapon we have firing at their lead ship. Dr. Cross, monitor their energy patterns. The instant you see a weakness, I want to know about it. The Defiance's hull groaned as another entropy wave struck, this one stronger than the last. Throughout the ship, crew members worked frantically to maintain critical systems as their technology was systematically drained of power. In engineering, teams rerouted power conduits and boosted quantum field generators, buying precious minutes for their captain's desperate plan. Quantum jamming array ready, Captain, Thorne reported. But sir, the power requirements will leave us defenseless for at least 30 seconds while our systems reset. Kane looked around her bridge, seeing the faces of young officers who had joined Starfleet to explore the unknown, not to fight for the survival of their species. Yet here they were, humanity's first line of defense against an enemy that had devoured civilizations spanning millennia. The weight of that responsibility should have crushed her, but instead it filled her with a fierce determination that burned brighter than any star. 30 seconds to save humanity, she murmured, then raised her voice. All stations prepare for quantum pulse. On my mark. Mark. The Defiance erupted with energy as every available power source was channeled through the communication array. The main deflector blazed with blue-white light as it broadcast a carefully modulated signal directly into the Dark Armada's quantum network. For a moment that stretched like eternity, the enemy ships continued their relentless approach. Then chaos erupted across their formation. The organic vessels began writhing and twisting as their synchronized consciousness was torn apart by quantum feedback. Ships collided with each other as their pilots suddenly found themselves cut off from the hive mind that had guided their every movement. Purple energy arced wildly between their hulls as their entropy fields destabilized. It's working. Dr. Cross shouted over the alarms. Their energy patterns are fragmenting. They're losing cohesion. But even as the Dark Armada fleet struggled with the disruption, Kane could see new ships emerging from the debris field. Larger vessels, their hulls more crystalline than organic, began moving to restore order to the chaos. At their head flew a massive dreadnought that seemed to bend space around it, its surface covered in the same crystalline growths that had consumed Commander Voss. Captain, Voss's voice echoed through the bridge, but now it was joined by others, thousands of voices speaking in perfect unison. You have impressed the collective. Your resistance shows promise. You will make excellent additions to our consciousness. The massive dreadnought opened fire, not with conventional weapons, but with beams of pure entropy that aged everything they touched. Where the beams struck the Defiance's shields, the energy barriers simply ceased to exist, their quantum structures unraveling at the fundamental level. Shields down. Reeve called out as his console exploded in sparks. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12. Kane felt the deck plating beneath her feet growing cold as the entropy beams began affecting the ship's structural integrity. Around her, officers worked frantically to maintain life support as reality itself began to break down under the Dark Armada's assault. But humanity's first ship to stand against the darkness was not finished yet. The Defiance's hull screamed in protest as entropy beams carved through her armor plating like invisible knives through reality itself. Captain Kane watched in horror as sections of her ship simply ceased to exist, their molecular bonds unraveling under the Dark Armada's impossible weapons. Emergency force fields snapped into place to seal the breaches, but she could see the strain in her crew's faces as they fought to maintain basic life support. Hull integrity at 43% and falling, Lieutenant Reeve reported, his voice hoarse from shouting over the alarms. Captain, we can't take much more of this. Dr. Cross suddenly stood from her science station, her face illuminated by the cascade of data flowing across her screens. Captain, I'm detecting something. The entropy beams aren't just destroying our hull, they're feeding the energy back to that dreadnought. It's growing stronger with every shot. Kane's mind raced as she processed this information. The Dark Armada didn't just consume civilizations, they used the very act of destruction to fuel their expansion. Every ship they destroyed, every world they devoured, made them more powerful. It was a perfect predatory cycle that had allowed them to spread across the galaxy like a cancer. The massive dreadnought moved closer, its crystalline surface reflecting the dying light of Kepler's star. As it approached, Kane could see that its hull was covered in what appeared to be faces, the preserved visages of countless beings from 100 different species, all wearing the same expression of beatific surrender that she had seen on Commander Voss. Your resistance is admirable but futile, the collective voice of the absorbed civilizations spoke through the ship's communication system. We have consumed species that wielded the power of supernovas. We have absorbed the knowledge of beings that existed before your son was born. What can one young race possibly offer that we have not already taken? How about something you've never encountered before? Kane replied, her voice carrying a confidence she didn't entirely feel. Human stubbornness. She turned to her tactical officer, who was bleeding from a cut on his forehead but still working furiously at his station. Mr. Reeve, prepare the quantum torpedoes for simultaneous detonation. I want every warhead we have armed and ready. Captain, our quantum torpedoes won't even scratch that dreadnought's hull, Reeve protested. The entropy field around it is too strong. I'm not planning to hit the hull, Kane replied, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. Dr. Cross, you said their ships are connected through quantum entanglement. What would happen if we detonated our entire torpedo complement inside that connection? Cross's eyes widened as she understood the implication. It would create a massive quantum cascade, potentially severing their hive mind connection. But Captain, to get the torpedoes close enough, someone would have to guide them manually through their defenses. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of failing systems and the distant sound of hull breaches being sealed. Every officer present understood what their captain was contemplating. A suicide run that might give the rest of the galaxy a fighting chance against the Dark Armada. Ensign Thorne looked up from her communication station, her young face set with determination. Captain, I volunteer for the mission. My console has direct control over torpedo guidance systems. As do I, added Reeve, his hand moving to the manual targeting controls. If we're going to do this, we need precision. Kane felt a surge of pride and heartbreak as she looked at her crew. These young officers, barely out of the academy, were willing to sacrifice themselves for a species they might never meet, for worlds they would never see. It was the best of humanity distilled into its purest form. Negative, she replied firmly. This is my ship and my responsibility. I'll take a shuttlecraft and guide the torpedoes manually. The rest of you will use the distraction to escape and warn Starfleet about what we've discovered. Captain, respectfully, that's not happening, Dr. Cross interjected, moving to stand beside Kane's command chair. You're not the only one who took an oath to protect humanity. Besides, you'll need a science officer to calculate the quantum cascade parameters in real time. Before Kane could protest, the ship lurched violently as another entropy beam struck their port nacelle. The lights failed completely, plunging the bridge into darkness broken only by the emergency strips and the hellish glow from the enemy ships outside. When backup power restored partial illumination, half the consoles were dead and the air was thick with smoke. Decision time, Captain, Reeve called out. Our warp core is destabilizing. We've got maybe 5 minutes before containment fails. Kane closed her eyes for a moment, thinking of her daughter back on Earth, of the billions of people who had no idea that their existence hung in the balance in this forgotten corner of space. When she opened them again, her resolve was absolute. All hands, this is the captain, she announced over the intercom. Prepare for emergency evacuation. All non-essential personnel to the escape pods immediately. She turned to her senior staff, the officers who had followed her into the abyss and stood ready to follow her into whatever came next. For those staying behind, I won't lie to you about our chances. But if we can disrupt their hive mind, even temporarily, it might give the galaxy time to prepare. The dreadnought was close enough now that they could see individual details on its hull, the grotesque fusion of organic and crystalline technology, the pulsing energy conduits that fed power to its entropy weapons, and the faces of the consumed pressing against its surface like souls trapped in ice. Commander Voss's corrupted visage appeared on the main screen one final time, his features now completely overtaken by crystalline growths that pulsed with purple light. Zephyr, you cannot win. We are inevitable. We are the end of all things. Join us willingly, and your suffering will be brief. Kane smiled grimly as she began the manual startup sequence for the torpedo bay. Lyrics, you always did underestimate humanity's capacity for spite. The Defiance's remaining torpedo tubes loaded with every quantum warhead in their arsenal, weapons designed to crack planetary shields now repurposed for an act of defiance that would echo across the galaxy. As the shuttle bay doors opened and escape pods began launching into the void, Kane prepared to write the final chapter of her ship's service record in fire and quantum fury. Outside, the Dark Armada closed in for the kill, unaware that they were about to face something they had never encountered in their eons of conquest, a species that would rather die fighting than live in surrender. The shuttle bay of the Defiance had been transformed into a makeshift command center, its walls lined with hastily installed torpedo guidance systems and quantum field generators. Captain Kane stood at the central console, her hands steady despite the ship's violent shuddering as entropy beams continued to carve away pieces of her vessel. Around her, the skeleton crew that had refused evacuation worked with desperate efficiency to prepare for their final gambit. Dr. Cross knelt beside a bank of science equipment, her fingers dancing across holographic displays as she calculated quantum cascade probabilities. Captain, I've run the numbers 17 different ways. The torpedo detonation will need to occur within a 3-meter radius of the dreadnought's quantum matrix core. Any further out, and the cascade effect won't propagate through their network. Lieutenant Reeve looked up from where he was manually calibrating the torpedo guidance systems. That's practically point-blank range, sir. We'll be flying directly into their entropy field. Our shuttle's shields won't last more than 30 seconds in that environment. Ensign Thorne remained at her communication station, monitoring the evacuation progress with tears streaming down her face. Captain, the last escape pod just cleared the debris field. Crew evacuation is complete. She paused, her voice breaking slightly. They're requesting permission to come back for us. Negative, Kane replied firmly. Their job now is to warn Earth about what's coming. Ours is to buy them time to do it. The shuttle Prometheus sat in the launch bay, its hull reinforced with every spare power coupling and shield generator the engineering teams could install. It wasn't much, a converted science vessel pressed into service as humanity's last hope, but it would have to suffice. 24 quantum torpedoes had been loaded into its cargo bay, their detonation sequences slaved to a single control panel that Dr. Cross would operate from the co-pilot's seat. As the crew made their final preparations, the Dark Armada's collective voice echoed through the ship's communication system one last time. The sound was different now, less confident, tinged with something that might have been concern. They had detected the energy signatures of the armed torpedoes and recognized them as a potential threat. Your weapons cannot harm us, the voice insisted, but Kane detected an undercurrent of uncertainty that gave her hope. We have absorbed the military might of 1,000 worlds. Your simple fusion devices are no more threatening than the buzz of insects. Maybe, Kane replied as she strapped herself into the pilot's seat of the Prometheus. But insects can still bite. The shuttle's engines hummed to life, their quantum field harmonics carefully tuned to avoid immediate detection by the Dark Armada's sensors. Through the cockpit viewport, Kane could see the massive dreadnought looming above them, its crystalline hull reflecting the last light of the dying star. Somewhere within that twisted mass of converted matter, the consciousness of billions of absorbed beings worked in perfect unison to guide their species' endless hunger. Launch in 3, 1. The Prometheus shot out of the Defiance's shuttle bay like a bullet, its hull immediately beginning to sublimate as it entered the dreadnought's entropy field. Emergency warnings flooded the cockpit as the shuttle's molecular bonds were systematically attacked by the Dark Armada's exotic energy weapons, but the reinforced shielding held long enough for them to begin their approach. Dr. Cross worked frantically at her console, using the shuttle's sensors to map the internal structure of the enemy vessel. I'm detecting massive quantum resonance patterns near the ship's core. Captain, their entire consciousness network is routed through a single crystalline matrix. If we can destabilize it, we turn their greatest strength into their greatest weakness, Kane finished, understanding the beautiful symmetry of their plan. The Dark Armada's hive mind allowed them to coordinate perfectly across vast distances, but it also created a single point of failure that humanity's desperate gambit could exploit. The Prometheus twisted through a barrage of entropy beams, its hull now glowing cherry red from the thermal stress of existing in an environment that fundamentally opposed the concept of ordered matter. Behind them, the Defiance continued to fight, her remaining weapon systems firing uselessly at the smaller Dark Armada vessels to maintain the illusion that the shuttle launch was merely another escape attempt. Proximity alarms, announced the shuttle's computer in its calm, artificial voice. Hull integrity compromised. Recommend immediate evacuation. Kane ignored the warnings, her hands steady on the controls as she guided their dying vessel toward the dreadnought's quantum matrix core. Through the viewport, she could see the faces of the consumed pressing against the enemy ship's hull, their expressions shifting from beatific surrender to something approaching awareness as the Prometheus approached their prison. Among them she recognized Commander Voss, his crystalline features now showing what might have been regret. For a moment, their eyes met across the void and she saw a flicker of the man she had known, the proud defender who had fought to his last breath before being absorbed into the collective consciousness that had destroyed his world. Zephyr, his voice whispered through the communication system, but this time it was different. Individual. Human in a way that the collective voice could never be. I remember, the Academy, our debates about entropy and order. You were right. There is beauty in chaos, but only when it serves life, not death. The moment passed and his face was swallowed again by the crystalline matrix, but the message was clear. Somewhere within the Dark Armada's vast consciousness, fragments of individual identity still existed. The consumed civilizations weren't destroyed, they were imprisoned, their unique perspectives and capabilities enslaved to serve their captors' endless hunger. 200 meters to target, Dr. Cross reported, her voice steady despite the certain knowledge of their approaching death. Quantum torpedoes armed and ready for synchronized detonation. The Prometheus shuddered as it passed through the dreadnought's outer defenses, its hull now more energy than matter as the entropy field consumed everything that made it real. Kane could feel the cold touch of dissolution beginning to affect her own body, her cells struggling to maintain cohesion in an environment that denied the very possibility of organized life. 100 meters. 50. 20. They were inside the Dark Armada's quantum matrix core now, surrounded by crystalline structures that pulsed with the combined consciousness of 100 absorbed civilizations. The torpedo guidance systems locked onto their target, a massive crystal formation at the chamber's heart that served as the nexus point for the entire hive mind network. "This is for every world you've consumed," Kane whispered as her finger hovered over the detonation control. "And for every world you never will." She pressed the button and 24 quantum torpedoes exploded in perfect synchronization, their combined energy channeled directly into the heart of the Dark Armada's collective consciousness. The quantum cascade began as a whisper in the fabric of space-time itself, a subtle discord in the perfect harmony that bound the Dark Armada's collective consciousness together. For a microsecond that stretched across dimensions, the crystalline matrix core of the dreadnought resonated with energies it had never been designed to contain. Then reality fractured. The explosion wasn't visible in any conventional sense. It existed primarily in quantum dimensions beyond human perception, but its effects rippled through the Dark Armada fleet like a stone thrown into still water. Ship after ship began to writhe and convulse as their organic hulls lost cohesion with the hive mind. The perfect synchronization that had made them unstoppable dissolved into chaos as individual consciousness fragments suddenly found themselves alone in the void. Captain Kane felt the moment of detonation as a sensation beyond physical pain. Her atoms scattered across quantum space before somehow reforming in the pilot's seat of a shuttle that no longer truly existed. Beside her, Dr. Cross flickered between states of matter and energy, her consciousness holding together through sheer force of will as the laws of physics rewrote themselves around the epicenter of their desperate gambit. "The Matrix, it's fragmenting," Cross managed to whisper, her voice echoing from impossible angles as the shuttle Prometheus existed in multiple quantum states simultaneously. "The consciousness patterns are separating. Individual minds breaking free from the collective." Through the disintegrating viewport, they could see the Dark Armada dreadnought tearing itself apart from within. The faces pressed against its hull were moving now, no longer trapped in expressions of beatific surrender but showing the full range of emotions as billions of absorbed beings remembered who they had been before their assimilation. Joy, rage, grief, and desperate hope warred across features that belonged to 100 different species. Commander Voss's face appeared directly ahead of them, his crystalline features flickering between his corrupted form and the proud Altarian warrior he had once been. "Zephyr," he called out, his voice clear and individual for the first time since his absorption. "The Matrix is collapsing but the cascade is spreading beyond this ship. Every vessel in their fleet is losing cohesion. You've done it, you've freed us all." But even as victory seemed within reach, Kane could sense something else stirring in the quantum foam around them. The Dark Armada's collective consciousness wasn't simply dissolving, it was fighting back, trying to reassert control over the fragments that were breaking away from its influence. At the center of the crystalline matrix, something vast and ancient began to emerge from the dimensional spaces where it had hidden since the universe was young. "The Void Empress," Dr. Cross gasped, her science officers' training allowing her to interpret the sensor data even as reality bent around them. "It's not just a hive mind, there's an individual intelligence at its core. Something that's been guiding the Dark Armada since before recorded history." The presence that manifested in the collapsing matrix core was beautiful in the way that entropy itself could be beautiful. Perfect in its dedication to ending all things, elegant in its simplicity. It wore the form of a woman, but one constructed from crystallized spacetime and powered by the accumulated death of civilizations. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of eons and the finality of universal heat death. "Impressive," the Void Empress acknowledged, her attention focused directly on the dissolving shuttle and its crew. "No species has ever successfully disrupted our collective consciousness. Your sacrifice has freed billions of minds from our control." She paused, and something that might have been genuine sadness flickered across her crystalline features. "It has also doomed your galaxy to face us as we truly are." Around them, the Dark Armada fleet was transforming. Ships that had been controlled by the hive mind now flew under the direction of their original crews, the billions of beings who had been absorbed rather than destroyed. But without the collective consciousness to coordinate their actions, they were turning on each other with the fury of the long imprisoned. Weapons that had been used to consume civilizations now fired on sister ships as old grudges and species conflicts reignited in the chaos of sudden freedom. "The cascade effect is destabilizing," Cross reported, her voice fading as the quantum environment began to affect her vocal cords. The freed consciousness fragments are fighting each other. They remember their individual identities, but they also remember being forced to participate in the destruction of their own homeworlds. The Void Empress extended her hand toward the dying shuttle, and Kane felt an irresistible pull drawing her consciousness out of her dissolving body. Your species shows remarkable potential, the ancient being continued. I offer you the same choice I have offered to the greatest minds of every civilization we have encountered. Join me willingly, retain your individual identity within our collective, and help guide us toward a more selective approach to galactic consumption. For a moment, Kane felt the temptation of that offer. She could see the vast knowledge and power that came with joining the Dark Armada's ranks, the possibility of preserving at least some portion of humanity's legacy even as their homeworld fell to the entropy fields. She thought of her daughter Sarah, of the billions of people on Earth who didn't even know that this battle was being fought in their name. Then she remembered the faces pressed against the dreadnought's hull, the expressions of beings who had been convinced to accept that same offer, only to find themselves trapped for millennia as unwilling participants in genocide. She remembered Commander Voss's words about evolution and improvement, and how empty they had sounded coming from his corrupted mouth. I've got a better offer, Kane replied, using the last of her strength to activate the shuttle's self-destruct sequence. How about you take your collective consciousness and shove it into a black hole? The explosion that followed was small by cosmic standards, merely the antimatter annihilation of a single shuttle's power core. But it occurred at the exact moment and location where the quantum cascade had created a fracture in the Void Empress's control matrix. The additional energy disruption was just enough to prevent her from reasserting dominance over the chaos spreading through her fleet. As the Prometheus died its final death, carrying with it the consciousness of two of Starfleet's finest officers, the Dark Armada began to truly tear itself apart. Ships fled in every direction as their freed crews sought to escape the madness that had consumed their existence for so long. Some turned toward the galactic rim, desperate to find uninhabited worlds where they could begin to rebuild their shattered civilizations. Others, driven mad by memories of the atrocities they had been forced to commit, turned their weapons on themselves in acts of final redemption. In the dying light of Kepler's star, the first human ship to stand against the Dark Armada achieved something no other vessel in galactic history had managed. They had taken humanity's greatest enemy and turned it against itself. The victory came at a price that would echo through the generations, but it was a victory nonetheless. The Void Empress watched the dissolution of her empire with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. When the last of the quantum cascade effects faded, she stood alone in the wreckage of her dreadnought, surrounded by the crystalline remains of a consciousness matrix that had once controlled billions of minds across hundreds of galaxies. Fascinating, she murmured to herself, her voice now heard by no one. Perhaps this young species will prove more entertaining than the others. 3 weeks after the Battle of Kepler Nexus, Admiral Theron Blackwood stood alone in his private office aboard Luna Station, staring at the official casualty report with eyes that had seen too much. The parchment trembled in his cybernetic hand as he read the final entry for the 13th time. U.S. Defiance, total loss. All hands presumed dead. Captain Zephyr Kane, missing in action. The door chimed softly, and Sarah Kane entered without waiting for permission. At 19, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had made her mother one of Starfleet's most respected captains, but her eyes held a grief that threatened to consume her from within. She wore the black dress uniform of a military funeral, though there had been no body to bury. "Admiral," she said simply, her voice carefully controlled, "the memorial service is about to begin. The families are asking if you'll say something about my mother and her crew." Blackwood set down the report and studied the young woman before him. In her features he could see echoes of Zephyr, the same determined jawline, the same intelligence burning behind careful reserve. But where her mother had carried the confidence of command, Sarah bore the weight of sudden orphanhood and the knowledge that her mother had died fighting monsters from humanity's darkest nightmares. "What would you like me to tell them?" he asked gently. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the viewport that showed Earth hanging in space like a blue marble against the star field. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of known space, the fragments of the Dark Armada were regrouping. Intelligence reports suggested that while the hive mind had been shattered, individual ships had begun forming smaller collective units. The threat was diminished but not eliminated, and humanity now faced the grim reality of a galaxy where entropy itself had been weaponized. "Tell them the truth," she finally replied. "That she saved us all, even if we don't understand how yet." The memorial service was held in the main assembly hall of Starfleet Academy, the same auditorium where Zephyr Kane had graduated summa cum laude 23 years earlier. Representatives from a dozen different species had come to pay their respects, many of them refugees from worlds that had been consumed by the Dark Armada decades earlier. They understood, perhaps better than humanity itself, what the crew of the Defiance had accomplished in their final moments. As Blackwood stepped to the podium, he looked out over an audience that included some of the galaxy's most brilliant minds, scientists, military officers, and political leaders who had come to honor 1,300 souls who had vanished into the void between stars. In the front row sat the families of the fallen, their faces etched with pride and devastating loss in equal measure. 3 weeks ago, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, the U.S. Defiance received a distress signal from the Kepler Nexus. What they found there changed the course of galactic history. For the first time in recorded memory, a force of entropy and destruction met something it couldn't absorb, couldn't convert, couldn't improve upon. He paused, his cybernetic eye focusing on a point somewhere beyond the assembled crowd. Captain Zephyr Kane and her crew didn't just fight the Dark Armada, they taught it something new. They showed it that some things in this universe are worth dying for, and that the greatest victory sometimes comes not from destroying your enemy, but from denying them the chance to corrupt what you hold most dear. In the weeks that followed the memorial service, strange reports began filtering in from the Outer Rim territories. Ships with organic hulls and crystalline superstructures had been spotted near several colonies, but instead of attacking, they had simply observed from a distance before disappearing into hyperspace. Intelligence analysts theorized that these were fragments of the shattered Dark Armada, now operating under the guidance of their original crews rather than the collective consciousness that had enslaved them. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the xenobiologist who had taken over Dr. Cross's research, spent months analyzing the quantum resonance patterns detected during the Battle of Kepler Nexus. Her findings, classified at the highest levels of Starfleet Command, suggested that the consciousness cascade had done more than simply free the absorbed beings from their collective prison. It had fundamentally altered the nature of the Dark Armada's technology, introducing concepts of individual choice and moral reasoning into systems that had been designed for pure consumption. The implications are staggering, she wrote in her confidential report to Admiral Blackwood. If our analysis is correct, Captain Kane and her crew didn't just strike a blow against the Dark Armada, they infected it with humanity. The fragments now operating throughout the galaxy are struggling with concepts they've never encountered before. Guilt, redemption, the possibility of choosing cooperation over consumption. Sarah Kane graduated from the Engineering Institute with honors, her final thesis focusing on quantum cascade theory and its applications to consciousness transfer technology. She was offered positions with several prestigious research institutions, but instead chose to join Starfleet's newly formed Deep Space Reconnaissance Division. Her first assignment was aboard the USS Prometheus, a ship designed specifically to explore the regions where Dark Armada fragments had been detected. On the night before her departure, she stood in her mother's old quarters aboard Luna Station, carefully packing the few personal items that had been recovered from the Defiance's wreckage. Among them was a small photograph, Zephyr and Sarah together at Sarah's graduation from Basic Academy, both of them smiling with the confidence of people who believed the future held infinite possibilities. As she placed the photograph in her travel case, Sarah made a promise to the empty room. "I'll find them, Mom. However long it takes, wherever they are in this galaxy, I'll find the fragments of what you created out there. And maybe, just maybe, I'll help them find their way home." Somewhere in the space between galaxies, the Void Empress drifted through the cosmic void in a ship constructed from crystallized time itself. The destruction of her consciousness matrix had not killed her. Beings like her existed beyond such mortal limitations, but it had taught her something she had never experienced in eons of existence: curiosity about a species that had chosen defiance over survival. She thought often of Captain Zephyr Kane's final words, of the casual dismissal of an offer that had been accepted by the greatest minds of 1,000 civilizations. There had been something in the human's voice, a quality that she couldn't quite identify but found strangely compelling. It was the sound of a species that had looked into the abyss and chosen to laugh rather than despair. In the quantum dimensions where consciousness and reality intersected, she could still sense the fragments of the cascade effect spreading through the galaxy. The Dark Armada would never again be the perfect instrument of entropy it had once been. But perhaps, she thought with something approaching anticipation, it might become something more interesting instead. The universe was vast and full of surprises, and humanity had just taught her that even entropy could evolve. In the memorial gardens of Starfleet Academy, A new monument stood beside the memorials to other heroes who had died defending Earth and her allies. It was simple in design, a black stone obelisk inscribed with the names of the 1,300 souls who had served aboard the U.S. Defiance. At its base, fresh flowers appeared daily, left by visitors who understood that some sacrifices transcend the immediate circumstances that inspire them. The inscription at the monument's base bore a quote from Captain Kane's final log entry, transmitted in the moments before the Prometheus began its suicide run into the Dark Armada's quantum matrix. To those who come after, we stood against the darkness not because we believed we could win, but because some things are worth the attempt. The galaxy is vast and full of wonders, but none more wonderful than the choice to fight for what matters, even when the odds are impossible. Remember us not as martyrs, but as people who chose hope over entropy, courage over surrender. The stars are waiting. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, carried on quantum winds that transcended the boundaries of normal physics, the echo of humanity's defiance continued to spread, a small light in the darkness that would burn for generations to come. Can you create real-life HFY alien warship sci-fi story compelling third-person story based on the title I provide? The story should follow the structure outlined below. Through wormholes and warnings ignored, the story of the first human ship to stand against the Dark Armada. The story should be suspenseful, emotional, and intriguing. Use third-person narration to describe the actions and feelings of various characters. Use unique and notable names for each character. Do not reuse any names across stories, and avoid using the same common American names. Each story should feature fresh, memorable names. The story should consist of 7 parts, each part containing approximately 795 words, and the entire story should be written in paragraphs. Start the story with an engaging hook that compels the reader to continue. Introduce key characters, setting, and hint at the conflict. Conclude with a satisfying yet emotional ending in Part 7. Ensure the story resolves but leaves readers with a sense of mystery or sadness.